Welcome back to Tact Talks. I'm your host, Jack Brownwood, and this is the podcast where I speak to some of the brightest and most influential people in the tech industry in the UK. This week, I sit down with the Director of Engineering at Moonpig, Mark Evans. We talked about all sorts, from what it was like working at Moonpig during COVID, how do you maintain a culture while operating remotely, and the arrival fallacy.
When I look back, throughout my career, I'm like, if I get one more promotion, I'll have more impact. If I get one more thing, I'll be happier. When you achieve the thing you think is important or your end goal, so the happiness you expect might not be there.
For more information on the episode and Tact Talks, head over to tact-it.co.uk. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the episode. Mark, thank you for coming on.
Glad to be here.
We usually film in like a bit more of an open outside space, but we did previous to this. So I used to be able to comment on the weather, but I don't know, what is it like outside?
Raining,
of course.
Manchester.
Of course. Well, look, if anyone who doesn't know who Mark is, could you tell us who Mark is?
Yeah, Mark is currently Director of Engineering at Moonpig. I've been with Moonpig now for around 4.5 years, so quite a while. Seen quite a lot of changes. Been in the industry now probably over 27 years. So I've seen a lot. I've done a lot, worked in multiple countries. So, spent quite a bit of time in Spain, spent some time in Den Haag. I've volunteered for the WHO in India for a while. So yeah, it's been an interesting career.
Yeah, and come back to Manchester.
And come back to Manchester for the weather, of course.
Of course. Where was your favourite place if you had to pick?
I don't think I've got a favourite place. I think I've got favourite times, and I think most of those were when I first arrived in a country. Sure. You get to learn about the culture, the people. You get to learn to get frustrated very quickly when it doesn't compare to what you expect. So yeah, that's almost like the most exciting time is that initial arrival and managing expectations of yourself.
Love that. Fantastic. Well, look, we always like to start with your career started somewhere, and you've already told me that you're not a very good drawer.
No.
But could you please draw what you wanted to be when you were...
Crikey.
When you were a wee lad.
A wee lad.
Yes.
Back in the 70s. Crikey, how do I draw?
Everyone has the same thing. And look, the reason we do this again, Tact's big thing is creating a world where everyone gets their dream job. So we like to figure out where that started. I don't even know what that starting out. I always try to guess halfway through. Where did this initial...
So this kind of started driven from my grandfather. He was very much doing this thing. My drawing skills aren't really...
It's fantastic. It's incredible.
And I draw some hands. There you go. Random hands. And then to give you a clue, that's basically a uniform.
Okay.
You need a kind of a collar. You need a good collar. This is where it gets really awkward.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense. Yeah, I was thinking police officer for a second, but
close.
Pilot, right?
Pilot. Yeah.
Okay.
Need some stripes on your arm.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I loved flying as a child. I was in the air training corps.
Wow.
I used to go flying from Bournemouth Airport all the time.
For anybody who's listening, definitely go check the video out because that's a fantastic drawing by Mark. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Yeah, I used to fly with the air cadets. So probably every sort of 2 or 3 months, we'd get a weekend where you'd fly at least 5 or 6 times over the 2 days. Round from Bournemouth, right around the Isle of Wight, back round again. You get to control the plane. You couldn't land and take off because you're a little bit too young. But yeah, just flying is just an amazing feeling, like a feeling of freedom, which, as a young child, that's kind of what you want. You want freedom. You want to explore, and flying is just super cool.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And so how did you go from wanting to be a pilot to...
Yeah, I don't know. So I originally applied to join the RAF, but because I'm asthmatic, there's basically a policy where you can't join the armed forces with asthma. So it kind of like set my career back. I'm like, I don't quite know what I want to do. Like, what do I enjoy? And I wasn't quite sure. I'd enjoyed playing with computers from a young age, and I'm like, yeah, let's kind of do that. So I went to college in computer science, A-level, and that's kind of where it started. It wasn't a plan, and I never planned to get into technology. It was purely, I couldn't join the RAF, I'll do plan B, and that was kind of my plan B.
So what was because you mentioned, I mean, I don't know how long ago it was, and I won't make you admit it. What was the routes into computer science like back then? Was it well known?
It's always difficult, right? The hardest bit is to get your first job. So like I've done my 2 years at uni and got my A-level. Then actually, how do you get a job? Because everyone wants experience, and You can't experience without a job, and you can't get a job without experience. So you end up in this loop, and it's kind of sad that it still happens today. Like, you still can't get your first role without some kind of experience. So I applied to work for a small automotive company in the New Forest. They worked out of a cow shed near Brockenhurst. Like, it was very bizarre. And they took a chance, and kind of, I joined them as like a QA/IT person. That then really spawned actually I can build code, I can build applications for them. And it kind of really developed from there. Yeah, that first person that took a chance, ultimately they kind of helped me get to where I am today, which I'm really kind of grateful for.
That's incredible. I think people don't realize how I've said it in a couple of podcasts, how important it is to have that one person.
Just takes one, right? It can shape someone's life, and they did for me, and that for me was really, really nice.
That's incredible. Also, a bad man. I know you're obviously in a leadership position now, so you must really resonate with this. And especially a bad manager can also be a terrible.
Oh, definitely. Again, it can set you back. Like, if you haven't got someone that really champions your career and is there to kind of sponsor and support you, like, you can get stuck in a rut and get stuck going nowhere, and that's really not a great place for people to be.
No, of course.
So yeah, that's kind of also kind of helped shape my management career as well, like how I think about management. I think we talked before around servant leadership. Ultimately, my role is to be there to support and serve the team, not as some kind of like team maker slave, but there to champion quality, culture, kind of find out how I can help. And that for me is, again, kind of shaped kind of how I view myself as a leader.
Yeah, and that's a good point as well, because servant leadership is, for anyone who doesn't know what it is, I guess could be seen as like, oh, you're just a bit of a pushover, or how do you make that distinction?
The way I look at it is servant leadership's around having the team own the culture, not telling the team what the culture is. So ultimately, they're accountable for how they interact, how they work. You're there to give guidance, coaching, and support. You're not there to kind of do whatever the team want, but you're there to help. And that's kind of where the difference between kind of servant leadership and kind of slave leadership kind of comes in. But yeah, a lot of people end up in I'll make tea for the team, I'll do all their meetings for them, and like, that doesn't help the team grow. Like, there's always things teams have to do. So how do you as a leader support them doing those things? And then challenge and coach, and I think really push them to get out their comfort zone. People can get very comfortable very quickly. So actually, how do you give them that level of challenge? Because that's kind of where the growth comes from.
Yeah, but there's a sweet spot, right, between too much and like, oh, whoa, Mark, I'm not ready for this, versus, no, I know that you can do this. I kind of look at like line management. I don't really want more than about 4 or 5 people, because you can build that relationship, have that conversation frequently. I've seen teams that have 10 or 12 direct reports. It's really hard to get to know someone at that level. When you're spread so thinly, you almost play lip service to that. Versus really get to know people and really challenge and push them. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about line management as well. Like, it's really important to get that balance right between time with people and then obviously time thinking kind of more long-term and strategic. Getting that balance right is really important. So you're, again, at Moonpig, been there for 4.5 years. I guess as anyone knows who's read the papers, lots of stuff going on that's probably influenced your time at Moonpig heavily. Could you speak a bit more to that?
4 and a bit years is a long time, and Moonpig today is very different to when I joined 4.5 years ago. They were very London-centric. We've now got an office in Manchester, and that's sort of 70 odd people. We've gone through COVID, where kind of physical retail shops were closed. We've gone through an IPO. We've gone through a replatforming. Like a lot of things have changed in the last 4 years, and that's been really exciting. It's almost been non-stop, which, for me, I quite enjoy. I don't like to get too comfortable. It's actually that next challenge, that next thing to solve, it kind of keeps me going every day.
What was it like when you first started?
So definitely the team was a lot smaller. We had, an older platform that needed some love. We were going through quite a big kind of growth period, like really pushing to serve customers. Growing the team in Manchester, like opening a brand new office, hiring people for the first time. You've got to build that confidence that you're in it for the long term, not the short term. So that was a lot of my time and energy in the first sort of 6-12 months, was getting the office culture right, working cross location for the first time for technology. Like, putting a tech team in one place is the easy option. Putting it in 2 is harder. Putting it in 2 places but maintaining culture is really difficult. And so a lot of my time and energy went into making sure the culture was right. Because with culture, you can kind of solve everything else.
really important question in the minute is how do you maintain culture or build culture
Yeah.
whilst also operating remotely? How do you?
It's hard, right? There's no magic solution. I think you've got to be consistent. You've got to ensure that whether you're in the office or at home, you're treated the same way. You've got the same opportunities, the same access to people. Like it's very easy to go in the office and see the CEO or the boss, and try and get some time with them. So actually, how do you make that more fair? Luckily, we're kind of in London, Manchester, Amsterdam as a group. We've got a factory in Tamworth, a factory in Guernsey. So we're kind of already quite distributed no matter work from home or not. So kind of we're already in a good position in terms of all company comms are broadcast, so no one really misses out. That definitely does help. You got to think about meeting culture, like how you not that face on a wall while everyone else is chatting in the room. So thinking about when you're having a meeting, ask the people remotely their opinions, don't wait for them to speak up. It's really, really hard to interrupt a room full of people that are chatting. Try not to have side conversations, because again, like people on the screen can hear those, and it's quite distracting for them. So yeah, it just takes a lot of work, a lot of small signs and signals, and that's ultimately how you maintain your culture.
Yeah, because when COVID hit, the big thing was just like, let's every Friday let's have beers together and let's do a crazy hat day or a crazy shirt day or
yeah, it's the whole kind of COVID thing. I think kind of changed work and brought forward changes to ways of working by, personally think 5-10 years. But these things were always going to happen eventually. I think COVID has accelerated that and showed that remote working was possible and you could be as effective or sometimes more effective, where a lot of companies previously were quite skeptical. Luckily, Moonpig have always been, because we had the cross location, like quite flexible.
yes.
But yeah, a lot of my friends work in companies that were like, have to be in the office 5 days a week. Like remote working is not an option. COVID kind of forced them to review that. I think that's been really, really helpful to kind of, ways of working, work-life balance. People can spend that time going to the school play or do the school run in the morning or spend time with family. I think that's been a really, really positive change. But 2 years of COVID, it feels like a very long time. I was in Amsterdam at the time.
Oh, wow.
And it was Wednesday, it's all going to be okay. Like a week's time, we'll come back to the office. And it was almost 2.5 years. It's crazy period.
It doesn't seem real now, does it?
It doesn't, no, just thinking about shops shut, businesses closed, furlough, you couldn't get food.
Yeah.
Toilet roll shortages.
Toilet roll.
all the things to run out of toilet roll. Like who would have thought? Panic buying and it just feels like a very different world. Even today, like you kind of forget. It was only last year. Like we're still in a version of lockdown last year. It's definitely strange.
Yeah, it is. And I think talking about the remote working side of things, I think before, as you know, before COVID, everyone was screaming out, let me work from home, let me work from home. Mm-hmm. Then like, okay, now you need to work from home full time for 2 years. Yeah. And everyone was like, okay, maybe I do kind of like a bit of the office stuff. Yeah. So it's gone kind of, I feel it's gone one extreme to the other. And then now it's getting to a little a medium point.
It was always going to equalize at some point. I think I've always enjoyed the office. I enjoy talking to people, having ad hoc conversations. I often find work from home full time really difficult. You can make it work. I think my ideal now is kind of a nice hybrid mix. Some time in the office, some time at home, and prioritize your calendar, your day around whether you're at home or not. So when I'm in the office, try not to book back-to-back meetings all day. Try and spend time with people in the room. When I'm at home, meeting days, like focus work. Know that the office time is about casual conversation and interruptions. If you do that, you'll find the switch between the two less frustrating.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's really good. Yeah, I kind of like use that day to binge out on the social stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just accept that's going to happen. Like you're not seeing someone for 2 weeks. You're going to have a conversation. You're going to have coffee. You're going to go for lunch. Things you may not do when you're at home. Like you wouldn't book meetings for things, but you'd have a conversation for 20 minutes. Plan for your day to be interruption filled. You'll be less frustrated when it actually happens.
Yeah, really, really good point. COVID hit. You were the only place, or one of the only places that you could buy cards. What kind of toll did that take on your infrastructure?
It's kind of a real challenge. So, when you couldn't go to a shop and buy something, and there was a lot of outpouring of love, and you couldn't see family, so you wanted to find ways to kind of let people know you cared. Moonpig were one of the few places you could still go. And I think it was a very difficult time for everyone. We wanted to be there for all customers, and there's only so much you can do from an infrastructure or platform perspective. So actually we had to find very creative ways to still be there for customers and let them kind of share that emotion. So we launched e-cards as a way that we couldn't print faster. So actually, how can we still allow you to send a personalized card? And kind of e-cards was the thing we went for.
Oh wow.
It was definitely a real challenge to be the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, the one thing I love about Moonpig cards is, and it sounds like an advert for Moonpig, it's not, but it's just the fact that, because my initial, what used to put me off buying cards online and sending them was the fact that it was all typed out.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, it's a bit robotic.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can write a message, take a picture of it, so it's your handwriting, I think is incredible.
Yeah, I think ultimately we're looking for ways to make things more personal, whether it's handwritten, whether it's, experiences. Like experiences seem to be pretty big. Again, through COVID, I think people realized possessions maybe aren't the thing you want. Actually, an experience, whether it's a driving experience, a holiday, a golf lesson, actually, how do they become more important to people? Especially when things like cost of living are a challenge. Like, I think where people spend their money now is more selective. And I think people also want that experience. Like, I went to Croatia recently. I went there purely for the experience. And it was more a case of, I'll remember that holiday for years to come.
Sure.
The pack of beer my brother bought me for my birthday last year, I've already drunk that. That's gone. I've already forgotten what he bought me. Yeah. But yeah, the time on holiday and things is kind of what you remember.
That's brilliant. And I think, well, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you next, actually, because you're extremely well traveled. You've worked in multiple different countries, really different countries as well. Yeah. What was that like?
Yeah, it was interesting. So what you soon realize is cultures can be very, very different, even though you're not that far away. I spent 6 odd years or 7 years in Spain. It's only a 2-hour flight away. Like, it's not a million miles away. But you learn very, very quickly that things happen when they happen. Like, don't expect anything to happen today. Maybe not tomorrow. I won't even tell you when it will happen. So you kind of end up in this place where it's like, it will happen at some point. Just chill out. And that's been really, really helpful. Seeing families playing in the town square at midnight was just normal. Like, it's not a thing you kind of see in the UK. So that kind of family focus is also really interesting. Then you kind of move to an Amsterdam or a Holland, or things there are very efficient. They're very direct. If they say something's going to happen, it will happen. So you kind of have that they said it'll be tomorrow, it'll be tomorrow. So again, that was also really, really interesting. I like the direct nature of Dutch conversation. It's never meant to be rude or aggressive. They just get to the point.
Sure.
But what I really like is they still talk about the weather. So it's raining in Amsterdam today. That kind of connection to the UK, we love to talk about the weather. I found really interesting. My time in India was also kind of eye-opening. You don't know what to expect in India until you go. And you kind of see, like, people often have nothing. Like, owning a house is super, super exciting, and they're really proud. So they invite you around and you'll have dinner with their family. That for me, again, is really interesting because you appreciate the small things. Often we can forget we are quite lucky in this country. Like, people have a lot of nice things. It's not always the case elsewhere. So that appreciation of the small family-oriented details, again, I found really, really interesting.
Wow. All I'm taking from that is that not that any particular culture, we're not saying is right or wrong or, the correct way of doing things, but it's almost taking those bits and being like, oh, this kind of like thinking about how other cultures think about certain issues or problems or how they interact.
Yeah, don't try and assume your culture's the right one. And don't try and apply your culture to every problem. Because ultimately people are different, they have different experiences. And that plays a little bit into the leadership style as well. Like, try to understand where they come from, their background, try and learn about them, because you can have better in kind of conversations, and you can figure out how to help.
What do you think the best way, say you were coming into a new team that was already established perhaps, I don't know if that's something you've ever done, probably assume it probably is.
Yeah.
What's the first thing that you need to do?
I think just talk to people.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of sitting down, having a coffee with each person individually, understand where they've come from, what they're looking for, what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy. You kind of have to understand everyone's perspective around where things maybe don't work how they'd like. what they love, what they don't love, because everyone's got a different kind of perspective. By doing that, you get a feel for themes, patterns. You can understand, like, as a leader, how can I help?
Sure.
Like, what's the first thing I want to do? Is it give them more breathing space? Is it focus on technical debt? Is it focus on deployments or friction? Like, where is it you can help? And you only really find that out by having conversations, and doing it over a coffee in person where possible is definitely preferred. If not, get time booked in on a video call really, really quickly. And just spend time just having a conversation. You can find out a lot.
Yeah, I bet. And we were talking about effects of a really good leader versus a really bad leader earlier, and how it can be detrimental to somebody or really empower them. And it's something that I'm guilty of as well, is people don't remember how busy you were or how rushing about you were. They remember the kind of time that you spent with them. Is there anybody that you've crossed paths with before that is really etched in your mind as a really great leader?
Yeah, a number of people for different reasons. So I spent a few years working at Sainsbury's, and there was one of the HR team there introduced me to kind of servant leadership as a concept. Hadn't really heard of it before. And they really pushed me to think about what kind of leader am I. They shared the book, once reading the book. They really pushed me to think about management style differently, especially inside of a big organization. That for me was really interesting. When I worked for a small startup in kind of property, the CEO there was the kind of really inspiring, give him a speech and he'll wow everyone and there'll be tears. What I took from him was he's pure efficient to get stuff done, but without working crazy hours. Like sometimes we kind of, get up at 5 and do the gym, and by 9 you've done 9 things. Actually, he was able to get a lot of stuff done by working a normal kind of 9 to 5 while supporting his own family. And did it by being ruthless with what he did and what he didn't do. He called up, I'm a CEO, I do these 3 things. If you see me doing other things, tell me and I'll stop.
Right.
That for me was kind of really interesting. Because we sometimes, we celebrate being busy.
Yeah.
Oh, such a long day, so many meetings. Actually, to be an effective leader, that's probably the wrong approach. You almost want to have free time, to have time to think, have time to be strategic. I'm guilty of, a really busy day today. I've done so much, but you've actually not really achieved anything. So actually, how do you focus on what's important versus kind of all the noise?
Yeah, that's so true. Like, it's been fetishized, hasn't it, to be like super, super busy?
Yes. And the LinkedIn posts. I'm up at 5 in the gym. And like, I'm asleep at 5. And I intend to be asleep at 5 for a long time to come.
So true. And do you think an element of it is, and really, I've spoken to a CEO, I won't mention who the business he's the CEO of, but I asked him his advice on how he keeps his diary free and stuff, and he said, I just don't do anything in the morning. My mornings, I have no meetings. That's just my time to do all my work. And then 12 or 1 onwards, that's when I book all meetings in. So it's that whole ruthlessness around your schedule, and it's Parkinson's law as well, isn't it? Right?
It is, yeah. And I try and replicate that, but I like to talk to people, so I sometimes say yes a little bit too easily. I'm not perfect, but I have time in my diary blocked out as focus time. That's where I can kind of get stuck in and solve problems or be strategic. I got my one-to-ones pre-booked in calendar, so I know when they are. I try and, where possible, avoid back-to-back meetings, because it ends up in a very long day. I think all of us as leaders should try and do the same thing. Find time for that focus, that time to sit back and think. I can't remember who called it. Basically, find time to be bored, because when you're bored, your brain then processes the information you've collected, and you can kind of sort through it a lot faster.
It wasn't like a famous scientist who he was trying to work out an issue. This might be completely wrong. I hope it isn't. He started doing a very menial job to allow his brain, like you said, just to in the background, and he solved the issue. Was the end of it. I probably doesn't do that story justice, but
it might not be true. But there was an episode of The Big Bang Theory, which I love that TV show.
Oh, was it really?
Where one of the I think Einstein or someone worked in the patent office, and that was their mundane task.
Oh, nice.
And that allowed their brain to be free and think about other things. It might not be a true story, but it's a good episode.
There's a story and there's a message in there either way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, how many times have you solved a problem in the morning, in the shower, or whilst cooking dinner?
Sure.
That's purely your brain doing something else. I try and force that through playing the piano. Not very good, but I still try. I ride a motorbike. I volunteer for a blood bike charity. These are all things designed to stop me thinking about work, because then my brain has time to process, and it's amazing what you can solve if you do that.
That's a really good bit of advice. Amazing. Okay. So Moonpig at the minute, anything that we should be keeping an eye out for in the next 6-12 months that's going on?
Yeah, I kind of think what am I most excited for? There's so many things happening. We've just launched video cards, which I think is a really interesting concept.
Oh, incredible.
So you'll get a printed physical card through the post. You scan a QR code, you can then watch a pre-recorded video. That for me is kind of really interesting.
Yeah.
Especially in a world where you can't see everyone face to face. Using it for distant relatives that may be abroad. That for me is kind of a really interesting take on how do we make things more personal. And actually, seeing your grandkids appear in a video on a card you've got for your birthday, that for me is really, really interesting. I've been using group cards more and more often, where you can have multiple people sign the same card.
Wow.
So again, like distant family birthdays or work anniversaries, it's nice to get a card with like 10 or 12 people all sign their personal message.
Yeah.
And it comes printed on a single card.
Or remote teams.
Remote teams, the hybrid working, again, kind of plays quite nicely. Those for me are really, really interesting kind of developments that we've been working on. Loads more to come.
That's fantastic ideas. Love that. Brilliant. So I want something we discussed before you came to the podcast was your interest in, and you have a few interests, obviously, definitely, and it was the interest in the arrival fallacy.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I didn't know what to call it until recently. So it's probably over Christmas I came across this article, and it was called the arrival fallacy. And when I look back throughout my career, I'm like, if I get one more promotion, I'll have more impact. If I get one more thing, I'll be happier. If I buy a house, I'll be super happy. And it's a thing called the arrival fallacy. So when you achieve the thing you think is important or your end goal, the goal tends to move, or you tend to find other things are in the way. So the happiness you expect might not be there. So when I was going through my early career, if I can become a senior engineer, I can do this stuff. If I become a head of engineering, I can do this. If I can become a director engineer or a CTO, I can do this other stuff. And what I found is each time there's just been different challenges. It's not a nirvana. There's no like perfect role. Every time you get promoted or do something new, you find a different level of constraint or a different challenge to solve. There's no end goal. And that for me is kind of like, well, if there's no end goal, what am I chasing? I spend my entire life chasing the next thing. And where I've got to now is just, I'm going to see how it goes, right? Don't try and chase a thing that may not give you happiness, and focus actually on what makes me happy now. I think that's really important as, people kind of start their career today, and what do I do to become a senior engineer? How do I become a principal engineer? How do I become a staff engineer? Just think about actually what's the reason for getting there? Like, what is it you're chasing? Just to make sure that when you get there, you're not disappointed.
For anyone listening who then is thinking, but then how do I progress? How do I strive for that next thing? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think progression comes in a number of ways. So one is job title, pay. You've kind of got the intrinsic kind of progression. You've then got the kind of the growth mindset kind of progression. So I learn a new skill, I work on a different problem, I work with a different team. Learning a new skill isn't I read a book or I take an online Udemy course and I know it. You take a skill, you spend 10% of your time learning it. You spend 50 or 60% of your time doing it repeatedly until it becomes second nature. And then you spend 40 or 30% of your time teaching it to someone else. That tells you that you've kind of got the context, got the knowledge, and you can teach it to someone else. The example I used a few years ago was learning to drive a car. Like, you learn to drive a car, you're very conscious of changing gear and indicating and looking in your mirrors. After sort of 2 or 3 years, like, you get your test, and your test teaches you how to drive a car. It doesn't teach you how to drive. So after 3 or 4 years, you don't know when you change gear, you don't know when you indicate, you don't know when you check your mirrors. It becomes almost natural. At that point, you've then got the brain power to learn the next thing. Think about the breadth of things you can learn, and don't think about growth only as job title or pay. Like, there's so many more things you can grow in. And that, for me, I think makes really well-rounded people, where they're not just, I can do one thing really well. Actually, how can you do broader things? And you can't know everything in intimate detail, but I think you can find things that you're passionate about. And that's kind of where I'm chasing my own growth now. Not necessarily job title or progression. It's okay, cool, I've not done this before. Let's explore that a little bit and see what I think.
It's tough, isn't it? Because I think as society tells you that salary and title is, and it is a tangible way of saying how well are they doing, unfortunately.
If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, kind of pay and like living conditions are kind of like the basic.
Yeah.
Like once you've kind of got that, the ends start moving away from just money and status, moving to kind of the broader things. So culture, work-life balance become way more important. But ultimately everyone should be paid well for what they do and paid fairly. But that for me is like the basic level of kind of happiness. It's then like how do you get happiness and growth elsewhere? So ultimately, I can earn more money and I'll spend it. I'll buy more things I don't need. So actually, how do you take it back to not for minimalists? Some people are like, I want just the basics. I do spend money on things I don't need. But actually, how do you get growth without just always chasing something? And that's kind of a bit of an interest of mine right now.
I love that. Is that where the interest in the pianos come from? You were talking about?
Yeah, I played the piano when I was really young. I want to find a way to switch off and do something different. And I like music. Like when you're playing music, you've got to really think about the notes, what your hands are doing. You've got to think about the rhythm. It kind of forces you to stop thinking about other stuff. Like my brain's always going 100 miles an hour. I'm probably thinking about 9 things at once. And you end up with kind of fatigue. How often have you sat, after a day's work and your partner said, what do you want for dinner? You're like, I don't know, but I can't think anymore. So actually, how do you avoid that kind of decision fatigue as well? I know people that have the same clothes every day. So they've got, 10 pairs of jeans and 10 t-shirts that are identical. And they wear the same thing every day because they haven't got to decide. They've got a morning routine where they do the same 5 things every single day to save them having to decide. Again, that's something else I'm thinking about right now is, how do I take away some of the decisions that I have to make every day to allow my brain to have the power and the energy to think about bigger things?
Yeah.
And music's part of that for me.
I met with a friend the other day, Lydia, who was telling me about the spoon theory. Have you heard
No,
about
I've not.
I've never heard of it either. And it's, I guess you could replace spoon for something else, but basically every task, going to the work, getting up in the morning, requires a certain amount of spoons, and you only get a certain amount of spoons every single day.
Yeah.
And dependent on how drained you are, one day going to work might take a certain amount of spoons, whatever. But like you said, I think if you can take away those decisions and avoid decision fatigue, or get some spoons back, basically, you're gonna have more spoons to put into the stuff that you enjoy doing.
And I think about that from a learning and development perspective. Once things become second nature, your brain is then free. You've got that extra battery to do other things. Where if you're trying to learn 5 things at once, your brain is now split in 5 ways. Yes. And it's really, really hard to cement anything. So actually, kind of learn less at the same time. Again, another kind of thing that I'm working on. So piano is my big thing right now. I've gone on and off over COVID. I bought a nice electronic piano a few years ago. It's just a really nice way to just give your battery time to recharge. It makes a massive difference.
Love that. That's fantastic. Well, I'm conscious of time. I could sit here and talk to you all day, to be honest, about this. But one thing I always like to say at the end of a podcast is, and you've got quite a few hobbies, so this might be a difficult question, but if today was your last day on Earth, you weren't on this amazing podcast or spending time with family and friends, what would you be up to?
I'll be volunteering. So I'm a volunteer blood biker. So I support the NHS in evenings and at weekends. Basically ride a motorbike. We carry blood, plasma, platelets, donated breast milk, medication. We do whatever we can with a motorbike to help the NHS to kind of relieve pressure. I love doing that. It gets me out of the house, gives me a good feeling I'm doing something useful. Yeah. I've got time to spare. I enjoy riding, so I can kind of take 2 passions and make something good out of it. It kept me really sane through COVID because we were out doing the COVID samples and the swabs and the vaccinations, like carrying that around, kind of allowed me time to get out of the house and get away from like being enclosed all the time. So yeah, I'd probably be doing that.
Incredibly altruistic. Have you used people say they're going to go on holiday or whatever?
I'd love to go on holiday too.
That as well.
Definitely. I went to Croatia last year. The first time I turned my phone off on holiday, left the work laptop behind and like read books, like physical books. Again, I'd do that. as well. Like that's also really, really nice. Again, it's that recharge. Wandering around, no plans, no big thing for today. I want to get up, walk in the street and go, that looks fun. Let's do that today. Again, one less decision to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I've absolutely loved speaking to you, Mark, and
Thank you.
You've had an interesting career so far. It sounds like exciting things going on at Moonpig, and yeah, really excited to see where you are in the next 12, 18 months,
Great, thank you. No, it's nice. It's been a great conversation.
Great, cheers.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we'll catch you on the next one.